I pledge allegiance to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please. So on the first item for us to talk about is just to adopt the agenda for a special meeting the union has adopted.
Move. Second.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passed. Joe, in the minutes tonight too? Okay. So do I have a motion to adopt the minutes of June 27th?
Move.
Second.
Motion all in favor? Any nays or abstentions? The next item and principal is to hold hearing. This is for local law amending Chapter 240 for the public hearing. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
I had, would you, at this point, Ted? Ted, well, let's have principals first, and Ted Grogan, identify yourself, please.
I'm Ted Grogan. I am the Vice President of Leasing for Diamond Properties.
Go ahead.
Frankly, I'm really not quite sure what the take.
Yeah. You've been introduced, but there's
Yeah, no. For about 3 years, we acquired Alpine Commons in 2018, and property. It's a great asset. BJ's is an excellent retail tenant. We also had at the time AC Moore. They had a good long-term lease. And right before the pandemic rolled out, AC Moore in filing for bankruptcy, and the lease was terminated. That was for Salvation Army in of 2020. They had approached us and they asked for a lease buyout, and at that time it was better to take something than nothing, so we agreed and we let them buy out of the remaining term of their lease. Right around about the same time, I hadn't been with prior to a real estate broker. I'd also worked for a real estate investment trust in New York City. When I first saw the site, Alpine Commons, when we closed on it, I drove up there, and one of the first things that went through my mind was we need to get some type of residential development. There was no visibility from the road when I first saw the site. I questioned our CEO's judgment, frankly, on the acquisition. To be truthful, I hadn't seen a shopping center that size, over 200,000 square feet, that didn't have really any visibility from a main route like Route 9. So with the two vacancies and an entire 102,000 square foot retail building that we were faced with, I called a contact that I'd been working with for years, and that was a gentleman, Jim Pays, and he is still currently with Dakota Partners, and I suggested that he take a look at the site. A bunch of other, and I have to just say that I did call a bunch of other residential developers just to see if there was interest, and everyone that I spoke to, from regional and national developers, declined once they took a look at the site. There's surprisingly to me to find out there's a lot of bedrock or ledge up on the site and the proposed area where Dakota Partners has their proposed development. But Dakota Partners, when I spoke to Jim Pays, he looked at it. We had been working with them prior. I had worked with Dakota Partners to no avail, no success as a commercial real estate broker, but I loved their product. I liked the company. We came to an agreement, and we're here today, and we are faced with a big challenge, not only with the lack of visibility from Route 9 and having 102,000 square feet of vacant retail. We also are in a very challenging retail environment that started prior to COVID. It's just really been a trend in retail. Obviously, online is one of the first and foremost, I would say, drivers of that slowdown in the retail market. COVID took a big hit, and now we have our own, economic headwinds that we all face, and so we're facing some tough, challenging times. We also have, which is presented difficulty for us in leasing. BJ's, excellent tenant, they have a lease that we inherited that has a lot of clauses that prevent us from leasing to tenants that otherwise would make sense. So every tenant that we look at, we don't only have to look at the zoning requirements in a SC shopping center zoning district, which are restrictive for us, particularly in this day and age, that we then also have to run it by BJ's to get their input. BJ's obviously has their own interests, as they should, with saying who and who can't go in there. So as we continue to, I think in the last meeting, I looked at the video, I'm like, why did I say that? But we've been banging our heads against the wall trying to lease up that space. And in just the heavy lifting of trying to lease that space, we thought, in working with Dakota Partners and our CEO, thought maybe if we were to get some help from the town in doing a text amendment change to make it more updated, more flexible, for us to get the type of tenants that are out there in today's market. We also wanted, obviously, to create a separate zoning area for the residential. In driving here tonight up to the site, it's a beautiful site. It's just, there's no visibility, as I mentioned. And so it's always been in my gut. I've been in commercial real estate for a while. If you get residential up to that site, it's going to be a pull. Not only for the residents that live up there, but we've also talked about doing a type of amenity up there for the residents of Wappinger. Big box retail without following the trend, and that's not why we wanted residential development up there. It wasn't the trend, it just makes sense. It's the hook to get people up there. When people come up there, tenants will follow. And that's really why we're here tonight. In a nutshell, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Brian, would you like to make a few comments? And then we can open up to questions, both the board and the public.
I have a little bit of a presentation.
Are we able to use this? Let me see.
Not yet.
There you go.
There it is. Okay.
Good job. You have a future. ID. Did the cable come out?
But when I walked up,
Like when you walked by?
yeah.
See behind you?
This happened last night too.
Because you lost power. We're giving our input. But somehow, there we go. I said it was a plug.
This one should be more steady.
There you go.
Cord.
It could be the cord too. Yeah, don't touch the cord.
There you go.
No.
Well, didn't we have an
Jiggle
issue
it.
at the last
There
meeting
you
with the
go.
screen turning on and off?
We had issues at the planning board meeting last night too.
Okay, well,
Try that now.
Just don't touch it.
No, he's gonna have to touch it to change the slide.
No, he doesn't have to touch the cable.
All right, hold on, here comes a new HDMI cable. Here we
Yeah,
go.
it's the cable, it's not the,
while he's doing that, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Brian Donato. I'm Vice President of Acquisitions and Development for Dakota Partners. We're working with Diamond on the residential portion of Alpine Commons. I guess primarily I'm here today to, there's been a number of questions over the last few weeks about exactly what we're building. So, we, unlike a lot of this, we've been able to put a lot of effort into really putting together our plan for Lot 5, both from a design perspective and from some sense, who we want to rent to, that kind of thing. So as soon as we get this going, I'll go into it a little bit more.
You gotta get into the drive, and then I just did slideshow.
yep. There you go.
There it is. There you go.
Thank you.
Not going no place.
You can go to the next slide. So this is just, obviously, it's hard to see, but it was somewhat intentional, not to not show it, but to really just show that this is a bit of a challenging site. There's topography. So we have spent a lot of time with both our architect, Steve, who's been here before, and our engineer, Banesh Engineering, trying to figure out how it works, how we can best lay out the site. So, this is our current design. It's 5 buildings, designed to sort of fit within the topography of the site. Just from a rough layout perspective, the buildings are between 24 and 36 units each. In addition to the residential buildings, we have a clubhouse. We're planning for about 1.5 parking spaces per apartment. And really, we're trying to preserve as much of there's towards the bottom of the site, there really is some nice forested area there that we're trying to preserve as much as possible. It also happens to be where a lot of the rock is, so it made sense to avoid that. You can go to the next slide. So our clubhouse, this is just a really rough conceptual view. These are not refined renderings by any means, but this is just a sense of what it would look like. 2,500 square feet is about the size of the building. It includes, our common amenities for the residents, large community room with kitchenette, fitness facilities, office and maintenance space, and then an outdoor patio. Also adjacent to this would be a playground, because we will expect to have a number of households with families there. site. So this is, again, a rough concept of the residential building. These are 3-story walk-ups. Each building is kind of designed in a pod, and what that allowed us to do is to really deal with some of the topography by being able to step the buildings, so each pod can be offset a little bit. Buildings are, within each building, there's common area laundry. What we do know is that these will be very highly energy efficient, all electric utilities, and ultimately meeting Tier 3 NYSERDA multifamily homes requirements, which is a very, very stringent energy efficiency standard. Go ahead. So I think I sent this information to the board in an email last week, but right now this is our proposed unit mix and rents. All this is really subject to change and won't be set until we get much closer to construction financing, but right now we're proposing a mix of 1, 2s, and 3s, mostly 2s, but we do have some 3s and 1s. Rent ranges, you can see up there. I won't go through them in detail. But the idea is that this is mixed income workforce housing, targeting a variety of incomes and with that, a variety of rent ranges. So this is proposed household incomes. So these incomes are based off of the Dutchess County area median income, which is, Brendan, do you remember, 115,000?
115.7, according to your note.
Perfect.
115.7.
Yep, sounds about right. So these incomes are based on household size, so the actual allowable income is dependent on the number of people that will live in the apartment. So they really do cover a wide range of incomes, from 47,000 up to potentially 117,000. One of the things I like to do to just put that in context is provide some information on, general local salaries for the kind of people that, we hope that would live here. So, the average salary at the Wappinger School District is about $70,000. EMS is in the area. I was kind of surprised by this one, where at about $62,000. Deputy sheriff, $52,000. The VA is really useful because all their salary information is published. So starting salary for an RN is about $80,000, and a licensed practical nurse is about $47,000. So just an example of some of the households that might live there. So I guess ultimately it gets to the question of really what does all this mean? What are we really trying to do here? So this is intended to be a true mixed income workforce housing and community, and ultimately it's going to be the final rents and the final mix of incomes that we target is going to be determined by the community need. One of the things I will say after watching last week's meeting online is, I think there is a need here to potentially have some units that are targeted to some lower incomes. And I think that, there's the county assessment, particularly the part about Wappinger directly, shows that there's a huge, huge need there. So, those are things that we are able to address because of how the types of funding that we're using. What does that mean, though, from the perspective of the tenants, is that this is not Section 8 housing. There's no project-based rental subsidy. The people that live here have to pay their rent. This is not a handout. The expectation is just like you would have at any other apartment community. But it does mean that residents do have to meet income standards. So it's not, in a market rate, a pure market rate property, residents, there's in some ways, there's less criteria than they have. Income is not as highly scrutinized as it is, as it will be here. And all that drives I think really how we get to this point, how we're able to offer a variety of rents, is because ultimately we will get our capital costs subsidized through New York State HCR. That's really how this program works, and that's how we're able to have a variety to target a variety of incomes and have rents that are at a variety of levels. What that does mean, though, is that we have a long-term interest in it. This is not a build and flip type thing. We've been in business for 10 years. We still have every single property, have ownership in every single property we've built, and we don't expect that to change. It also means that there's a level of oversight that comes with the financing that helps to ensure that the community remains high quality and well maintained. And then I said this before, but I'll say it again, is that really the final rents are going to be determined based on when we actually get to construction. You know, we'll do, you know, typically within a few months of being ready to close on a construction loan, we'll do another update to a market study to verify exactly what rent levels are supported and really what is needed within the community. It's especially important with all the economic changes that are happening. You know, what's supportable now may not be supportable in 6 months and in a year, and you know, that's ultimately what we want to look at and make sure that we have a project that is both financially viable for us and for the community. Happy to take questions.
Okay. I guess we open up the questions. Board members, you want to start? And then we'll open up the public floor.
I'd just like to talk about the HCR, New York State Housing and Community Renewal Program, with respect to, you mentioned subsidized efforts through that program. Can you expand upon that a little bit relative to criteria?
Yeah, so these are, New York State HCR has a variety of resources out there, and in exchange for getting these resources, you agree to income restrict units at a variety of levels. That's one of the great things. I work in 10 different states. I'm from New York. I live in New York, but New York has a lot of really great programs that allow us to touch a variety of incomes. So the way it works is in exchange for providing their upfront capital, not rental subsidies, upfront capital, that we can build the project and ultimately charge rents that would be considered below market. You know, if you were going to go build this as a market rate property, you need to be charging, you know, $2,600 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. That's what the economics of it work. So by providing the capital, we're able to hit those different rent ranges. But again, I'd like to point out that this is just capital up front.
Right.
It does not, they do not subsidize the monthly rent from the tenants.
Right. So if I'm hearing it correctly, it's an incentive from the state of New York to builders to be able to cater to a variety of incomes.
That's
rather
correct.
than
Yep.
one specific price point.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct. And New York has been really a leader in the nation in providing tools that go beyond the typical, what I'll say, low-income affordable. They allow us to rent up to 90%. They actually, in some areas, allow us to rent up to 130%. So that's a unique tool that we're lucky to have in New York.
Okay, and the reason why I bring this up is with respect to the previous presentation by Ann Saylor at the last meeting, where very interesting information with respect to the housing analysis, the gap analysis per se, where folks on the high end tend to be seeing a housing deficit and folks on the lower end tend to be seeing a housing deficit.
Right.
And how by not offering a mixed variety of price points, you can be inadvertently causing people to buy down and then displacing folks with lower incomes. So I think, if I'm hearing this correctly, the New York State Housing and Community Renewal Program is encouraging those that are constructing these units to not focus on one specific demographic, but a wider market.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Does the program disqualify higher incomes?
Over a certain amount, yes. So there is for each rent, or for each income level, there is a maximum income that you can make. And I think that gets to Councilman Beal's point, is that it helps prevent people from buying down. Meaning you can't, you know, if you're making $200,000 a year, you can't come in and rent the apartment that's $1,500 a month.
Any other questions?
So you have a significant, I was looking at your rents here, so they're pretty significantly different from a one-bedroom ranging to roughly $1,300 to $1,900. And your middle apartments, roughly $1,500 to $2,300. And then your three bedrooms, $1,700 to $2,600. $1,300 seems pretty low. Are you guys able to do that based on all the restrictions that you were talking that BJ's may have on you as far as what they're going to allow you to build and not build?
I guess that would be a question for Ted.
chime in and say, BJ's is in full support of this. They had a concern about noise, and Dakota Partners help, you know, calm those concerns about putting up some trees as a buffer. Also, the gentlemen, they're headquartered out of Massachusetts, like you guys, and they weren't aware of where the loading docks. BJ's was concerned that the loading docks for their own building was going to be a problem for the residents. They've had that issue in the past, and as soon as we explained the loading docks were on the other side of the building, those concerns were put to rest. So, but BJ's is in full support. It'll pull, it'll pull tenants up to or clients up to their store, and it also could help house some of their employee base.
Any other questions from the board?
So do you, in order to make this, I'll say cash flow positive, you need the apartments in there in order to make this work? Like when you bought the property, you must have assumed you're paying X amount of dollars for it. And I don't know if that's the right person to ask or not.
Yeah.
So my question is, when you, whatever you paid for the property, which we know won't disclose, but when you bought the property, you must have assumed based on when you bought it that BJ's was going to be the only potential, tenant there. Did you factor in when you did that you could make this thing work at a cash flow positive, assuming BJ's was there? Or did you include AC Moore? Did you include Tops, Salvation Army? Did you take all that into account? Just curious how you came up with your analysis to figure, because what I'm trying to figure out is, do you need the apartments in order to make this work?
Truth of the matter is we don't. Okay? That's the truth of the matter.
Okay.
BJ's is in the bottom 50% of their performance. They're represented by Newmark, the National Commercial Real Estate Brokerage. And, we have a relationship with Newmark, so does our CEO. And to make a long story short, we get approached all the time to sell BJ's. Nobody is quite, when people approach us and we get unsolicited offers, Newmark represents them, so, Newmark and our relationship with Newmark, we've learned through conversations that BJ's location is in the bottom 50%, which is no surprise. But in terms of, and I hope I'm answering your question properly, we did it. I mean, frankly, the sale price is, I'll finish. I'll just say, we did it to bring the tenant, we wanted to bring activity up to the site. That's the ultimate goal.
I was going to say, it's no secret. All you have to do is go to land records. You know what they paid, and you know what the recording tax is, so you can back out exactly what they bought it for, and then you can make assumptions as to the lease. I'd ask to refashion the question though. You have a piece of property that's got a fallow 102,000 square foot building with probably another 150,000 square feet of asphalt sitting at a traffic light with 3 turning lanes into the property, 3 turning lanes out, from both directions, with sewer and water access right up front of it. Why wouldn't you want to see somebody invest in that property? why would you want to see it sit fallow and sit there with a risk, especially when you've already seen the property taxes on this property go massively backwards? I mean, I guess, you know, this is your classic infill adaptive reuse. Why wouldn't you want to see that happen? I mean, whether somebody makes a good return or a great return or a small return as the property owner, why wouldn't you want to see the investment in the community when you have all the bones are there? Water, sewer, stormwater, traffic signal. You already have a high volume road there. Its capacity is already set to handle it. So I don't mean to be argumentative, but I'm just sort of saying whether Diamond and Dakota are making money, how about looking at it from the standpoint of the community? The community is, why wouldn't you want the investment to go here?
So that's not my point. My point was I wanted to make sure that, number one, hopefully your accountants, whatever, when you bought the property, at least knew you were going to be break-even. To the extent that you're able to build on the property, right, then you would, certainly your cash flow would be much better, which is exactly what you all want. My point is why don't you build what's allowed now? Why would you want to change anything for them, what's allowed now from, you know, the zoning code? Why do you need a code change, I guess, is the question.
Well, I mean, I think what we've said, and this started back in you know, Jim Diamond's, who sends his regrets again that he wasn't here. As you know, he had a trip to be out of the country planned for a long time. But what we said at the beginning is there's a definite strong mismatch between what the code's allowing and who's calling to use the site. And I think both from Diamond's perspective and its understanding of what the town's perspective is, that the higher quality, both from their perspective as a credit rating, but also from creating a hamlet and within the town perspective, those uses aren't necessarily readily available, such as the multifamily here that we're proposing, such as the you know, the bunch of other uses that have come out through the interplay. I mean, I think it's really important here. As you know, we've been going back and forth on this for close to a year. So this is no longer our legislation that we're trying to push forward on you. It has been massively rewritten by your consultants, with inputs by your consultants, both from you and from them, as to everyone's best ideas. This is a collaboration at this point. This isn't what we presented. It's very different than what we initially presented. And we keep working on trying to improve it. So by example, you know, the rerouting of the road that's shown on that drawing to you, well, there's no reason to do that if you just re-tenant the building, right? There's no reason to upgrade the facades. There's no reason to those little outbuildings if you're just re-tenanting the AC Moore. There's no reason to do that green that was shown. You're certainly, if you're just re-tenanting those buildings and not putting that ring road in with the roundabout in the middle for Dakota to come off of, that connects BJ's, that connects the AC Moore building, which also would create the pad site for that hospitality use sitting up there, and or potentially a hotel. You're not creating that connection in that pedestrian and interaction. It's just going to be a big building over here, big building over here, and that synergy doesn't exist anymore. So all those opportunities are lost if you just put two tenants back in those buildings of a lower quality. And given where retail is, you know, does that become a cycle of people turning over every 5 to 7 years on lower credit ratings with a high level of tenant improvement requirement or non-requirement of the property owner? So I think where we are, from our perspective at least, is we've worked collaboratively, listened to your desires and the things that your consultants have asked us to see if we can incorporate, and that's what I think the product of the legislation that's in front of you. And there's a sketch as to what we think it could be, and it'll take a period of years, as we've all said on many occasions, that, you know, Dakota is the best way, in our opinion, to get people up there. BJ's is very excited about that. They've already signed off on that, and they like the idea of having, as Ted said, both shoppers, 144 families, right? Shoppers that could walk over, and also, I mean, it's expensive for housing here. I mean, their employees are probably coming from pretty far away. This would be a place for them to stay. I mean, I'll take a venture and a guess. A lot of their employees could be coming from across the river even. and commuting, which then also, you know, becomes an interesting question as to whether they want to work in the store that's across the river instead of coming to this store. So there's a retention issue for them if there isn't low cost, you know, and paired to their earnings, housing nearby. So I think this is an opportunity for an investment that is mutually beneficial and is kind of like the orange parable. It's bigger than the sum of each part because you get all the other improvements over time than if you just put two new tenants back into that 102,000 square feet. So I think that's the synergy.
I guess the question is, Mr. Grogan, can you put 2 new tenants back into those 2 big buildings without anything else, and what would those tenants look like?
I smile as I come up here only because I've received the 5th or 6th call today. Spoke to the voicemail messenger today about a flea market. Could we do it? Sure. We have a group, Fun Max Adventure Park, that is ready to go on the 65,000 square foot former Stop and Shop space. It would be family indoor fun concepts with bowling, rock climbing, ropes course, indoor bouncy castles, and that's really the extent of it. They'd have a food court. But yes, they're ready to go. The remaining space, we have interest in that. There is a furniture company that's interested, and you know, we're holding on to, particularly now with everything going on, we're holding on to every interested party. But you know, we've had, and I'll just name a couple. We had Bob the Baker, Joe the Baker, Joe the Baker. That was going to take about 40,000 feet. They ended up going to iPark 84. They beat us out in the taxes. We couldn't compete with that property. We also had indoor pool hall. We had 2 indoor pool halls that were interested. But most of the tenants that come up there due to the lack of the visibility are lackluster in credit and quality.
Has there been any interest in colleges?
No, I know it's zoned for that.
No, that's what I mean, because there's a lot of
Yeah, it is.
colleges in this area, you know, the culinary, Marist, Vassar, I don't have to name them all. But they're always looking for satellite areas, whereas you brought up the flea market thing. That happened down in Fishkill, and the flea market was down there, and Dutchess Community College has taken that over now.
Right.
Which is a boost to that area, and it's a
Right.
boost to the younger generation and the mature generation who want to
Sure.
learn new skills. So have you reached out to them or marketed to them?
We've marketed to every commercial real estate broker in the area for the last 2.5 years.
But the New York State education system, any of the colleges, have you reached out to them? The school districts?
I personally have not, no.
But it has Dakota. That's what I mean, if you're going to market it, that would be one area that might be very beneficial.
As a tenant?
Yes, as a tenant, because you're going to have students.
No, it is, absolutely. I know it's zoned for it, you know, and.
Right, but
yeah.
I haven't heard anything about that.
Did you guys call them at any time that we've been?
I'm sorry?
Have you called
No.
to try and?
We couldn't even keep Dutchess County Community College here. You know, they went to Fishkill, and then I tried.
And
You know, they weren't
Mays
interested.
was the Mays property where they went has been empty for 24 years?
Exactly. Yeah.
24 years.
Yeah,
So,
but
if
there
I-
is a need. There's an ongoing need for education.
I understand it took 24 years of vacancy.
No, I understand that. That mall has been
Okay,
empty for
yeah,
many
let's-
years.
So let me jump in real quick, because I don't personally believe it's our job as a government to be dictating to property owners specifically who they should be marketing to. I think we need to look at this from a global perspective. We have a property here that at one time was a $20 million rateable in this town. It was the most significant rateable in the town of Wappinger commercially, okay? That rateable decreased as we saw tenants leave, most notably the Stop and Shop and then the Top Store, okay? That rateable was reduced to about 17.9 million. in 2019, and then in 2021, it was further reduced to $14 million. If this remains vacant, it's going to continue to decrease, in my opinion, with respect to overall total valuation and assessment. I believe, as I've said previously, we have a unique opportunity here to be innovative and to be a leader. I've watched the 60 acres of Eastdale Village be built in the town of Poughkeepsie. Impressive mixed-use community, a model community, in my opinion, which really is utopian. We can't quite achieve that on this as a reuse, but that housing mixed with retail is a success, and it is truly a community within a community. You look at the existing plazas, just a few existing plazas on Route 9, and you'll see some parallels here. For example, Wappinger Plaza, which is located just north of the property, is in the shopping center zone. However, on the east side and on the north side, it is surrounded by the village of Wappingers Falls. There are multi-dwelling apartment buildings adjacent to Wappinger Plaza within walking distance. It's a similar type of model where you have Riverbend and Riverbend East adjacent to an existing shopping center plaza. Obviously, since the municipal boundary runs around the back of that, there was no zoning changes required because it was within the village of Wappingers Falls zoning, which allows for multi-dwelling in that area. If you continue north on Route 9 to the Duchess Shopping Center, which is, I believe that's the name of the plaza that includes Home Depot and Planet Fitness, you'll see multifamily housing behind that plaza in the village of Wappingers Falls. If you continue north on Route 9, Hudson Plaza is on the west side of Route 9. I believe there's a Price Chopper in that plaza and a number of other big box stores, and located immediately behind it is multifamily dwelling housing. And then most recently, if you continue north to the town of Poughkeepsie, town of Hyde Park line, you'll see the new ShopRite Plaza, which is pretty much opposite from Marist College, which is being built currently, and it will have multifamily housing incorporated into that project. So traditionally, multifamily housing was not something that had been viewed as traditionally included in a shopping center zone or adjacent to a shopping center zone, but you'll see there are many examples of it up and down Route 9. Another example could be south in the town of Fishkill, Walmart, Sam's Club, surrounded by multifamily housing. These are housing elements that, in my opinion, are feeding or contributing to the retail, either with employees or with customers. I think we have an opportunity here to do something innovative because that property, when it was developed in the early 90s, I remember the mindset at the time was, we don't want to see it from Route 9. We're not going to be building something that's visible from Route 9. That was the mindset at the time. Fast forward to 2022, and Ron Hicks will be the first to tell you, who is the Assistant County Executive for Economic Development, that the fact that that plaza is not visible from Route 9 makes it very hard to get any major anchors into that plaza. I believe we can control this development in a way through collaboration. We've had some good conversations here over the past number of meetings where I believe the board and the owner of the property and the developer have had some real good give and take. I got a lot out of the last meeting with respect to Councilman Casella's points on developing a ratio or a percentage with respect to a use on a certain square footage. I thought that was an innovative approach to being able to ensure that the vision that we have here collectively will be what we see in the end. And I think it's important that we understand the loading dock areas are not visible and not heard from the residential side, and I think that's exactly what we see in these conceptuals at this particular point. I agree with the owner and the developer. This is clearly a very challenging site from a topographical standpoint. There's a lot of elevations, there's a lot of unused asphalt that we can have repurposed into useful space. I believe that the price points that we just heard from the Dakota representative about, the true mixed income workforce housing, I think, is consistent with what we want with respect to our comprehensive plan when we look at town centers and village centers. I believe that the variety of rents that were explained can really meet a true demand without being specific to the high-end incomes. And I think that is consistent with Ann Saylor's presentation at the last meeting. Bottom line is right now, if I'm doing the math correctly, we have 100,000 square feet of empty space on that site, which is 50% of all of the square footage that exists currently. BJ's is the lone survivor. We certainly wouldn't want to see BJ's exit that property. I want to be in a position where we have crafted this legislation so that we're attracting the right types of retail to complement the housing and the right types of housing to complement the retail. And I think based on what we have been shown here, that they both do mix well and complement each other. So I think that more of the same in this town is not going to be the answer. I think we have an opportunity here to really be innovative and really we're at a point here on this large property to redefine the center point on the Route 9 corridor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, Malcolm, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. Earlier, when Councilman Casella had mentioned, why change it? If they can turn it around without changing it, why make the change? I prepared a few talking points just so that I don't lose track of my own thoughts, and I printed out a few copies if any board members would like to see it.
Sure.
Thank you.
So at this point, we've been working on the draft text amendment for some time now. It's gotten very long, it's gotten a little complicated, and so I thought it would be useful to zoom out and look at really what we're changing from the existing zoning code, which what we had tried to do was, take their concerns and their goals and look at how we can encourage positive redevelopment of the site. So I'm going to go through some of the current uses. Some of them are permitted and some of them are special permitted. Really what the distinction between that is, a permitted use is something that you're allowed to do as of right. You have to show us what you're doing, but you're allowed to do that. A special permitted use is something that we look at a little bit more closely. And depending on what that is, there's general criteria that you have to demonstrate that you have complied with. And some of the special permitted uses have specific criteria. So it really just means that you need to prove to us as a town that this special permitted use is not going to be more onerous or more disruptive to anyone else. So what we have there is a list of permitted uses and special permitted uses on the front page that are currently allowed in the shopping center. Government buildings, places of worship, private education, daycare, libraries, museums, offices, retail stores, craft and artisan studios, restaurants, bars and restaurant brewers, personal service, theaters, training schools, pet groomers, gyms, parks or playgrounds, healthcare offices, medical or dental laboratories, farm uses, including a farm produce stand, and bed and breakfast. Some of them feel a little out of date, but for the most part, those are your principal permitted uses. Now, your special permitted uses are going to be things that are a little bit more likely to create a disturbance to your neighbors. It's going to be things like catalog showrooms, fraternal recreation clubs, community clubs, things like that, commercial recreational facilities and entertainment uses. We just heard Ted talk about, potential tenant for that use. Motor vehicle towing, repair and service, mixed use, sewage treatment, public utilities, and telecommunication towers. If you flip the page, you see a much shorter list, and these are the things that when we took a look at the schedule of uses, it didn't quite make sense why these would be left out of the shopping center district. Many of these are allowed in the highway business district, and much of the highway business district is developed very similarly to the shopping center district. You're going to see veterinarian offices and commercial kennels without outdoor runs, manufacturing, fabricating, finishing, assembly, or repair of products, including retail sale of those products, assembling, finishing, or repair of products, including the retail sale of those products. Those sound very similar, and typically when we get applicants coming in to look for those uses, it's going to be something like an artisan studio, metalworking, carpentry studio, something like that, where you're coming in, it's a small scale, you build things and you sell it. Microbrewers and microdistillers, and hotels and motels. And then as a separate list, the two uses that we're considering adding to the shopping center with specific constraints, which would be warehousing and self-storage rental warehousing. Now just below that, I've sort of pulled out the specific changes that we're looking to make to encourage a more efficient and a more efficient redevelopment of the site, but also a better standard of living for anyone on that site, whether they be a commercial tenant or a resident. We would increase the height of the residential sub-districts from 2.5 stories to 3 stories, which is not a significant increase, but it would allow the redevelopment of Lot 5 in a much more efficient way. The height of the mixed-use buildings would increase from 2.5 stories or 35 feet to 4 stories and 50 feet, and that's the buildings that we would like to see developed in the future, where you've got commercial on the ground floor and 3 stories of residential above. The inclusion of the development area is essentially to allow the site to operate as one big site, but be broken up into smaller uses for financing purposes. But what it would also do is it would mean that they would be able to ignore internal lot setbacks. Right now, when you're building a building, you have to be a certain number of feet away from your side or your back or your front yard. And in a development site, that would be true for the outside. But the interior of it would be allowed to develop much more densely, which is what we want if we're going to encourage a mixed-use village within a village concept. And then finally, the existing housing unit density currently allowed as a special permit in the shopping center district would remain as the upward cap, but you would have density bonuses for certain sub-districts to encourage dense development in certain areas of the site and environmental conservation on others. And so, without getting into too much of the detail of it all, those are really the changes that we're creating in the SC zone to encourage, more efficient redevelopment of the project and a better end product for everyone. I just wanted to run through that briefly. Do you have any questions by any chance?
So I guess, everybody talks East Dale as the ultimate goal, right? Everybody loves it, everybody talks about it.
Sure.
And this lot obviously can't be that because of its existing and all. I would argue the village within a village because I dare say most people at that last building are not walking to a shop down there. It's just too far. So other than that, unlike Councilman Beal, I'm kind of disappointed that the apartments aren't going to be market value. That's what I had thought in my mind when we talked about the project. And basically, to summarize it, is we've got a housing project ready to go in, and we want to make a zoning change based on concepts that might happen, basically. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, right?
Well, I think it's twofold. On the one hand, we have Ted, who's looking for new tenants, and that was part of the ask. Let's add new uses to the shopping center district. A lot of those uses make a lot of sense. On the other hand, we have a multifamily development that would like to go in. As the zoning is currently written, they can, but there's a height restriction at 2.5, which is not desirable. You know, they wouldn't get the number of units they would look for, and that would potentially affect financing. And so really what they were looking for is, you know, can we modify this? Can we bring the buildings up a little bit? And throughout the course of that, we found other changes I found other changes, Jim found other changes that we thought would make, while we're making this change, why don't we make it as good as possible? So it could be as simple as, let's add a few uses to the shopping center district. Let's slightly increase the height on the mixed use special permit in the SC zone. But we thought, you know, while we're here, let's try to aim for something a little bit better than that.
So do we really need to do a code change, or can you do a variance to make the height from 2.5 stories to 3 stories?
I think that they could go for a variance, but I wouldn't recommend it. I don't think it's good planning. I think it would be better to come here to hash it out and talk about the pros and cons of that, and then make a decision.
Because our attorney talked about before restricting it to 50 acres or whatever it was, and you couldn't, you know, do some of the things that you want to do here. And by the way, you know, if you look at some of the other plazas, you got the Hannaford Plaza, you got the DeGarmo Plaza, they could always go for a variance themselves and have that modified. So I didn't think that was a feasible idea. So that's why I was saying, if they can go for a variance, say for DeGarmo or for Hannaford Plaza, why couldn't they do the same here? I mean, I'm not against development, but I want to do it the right way.
So, you know, Mr. Grogan or Mr. Donato, would you like to comment, you know, make comments with respect to Councilman Phillips, you know, questions with respect to the nature, you know, market characteristics of the housing, that people wouldn't walk, as well as worried about your concepts, which the conceptuals could very well change. Maybe you can address that. I think both need to address the conceptual aspect, because there's questions raised with respect to the village within the village and the pictures that you showed earlier about the commercial area. Not earlier tonight, you showed earlier in previous presentations.
So I guess I'll just address the idea of somebody walking there. I mean, I don't think there's any way to say for certain whether people will use a car or walk. I mean, it's a distance that I would happily walk. I'm a pretty in-shape person, so I think that's, you know, it's going to be up to the individual people. I mean, I know that what I can say from my experience is that, you know, it's not a distance that people would choose not to walk based on just where I've built other communities and their adjacencies to if there's something there that's worth going to, I guess is ultimately the answer.
I guess my question is, when you think of the village within a village, it's apartments upon commercial, right? Typically, I mean, that's the idea that we get. And I'm not arguing, you have to work with what you have, and I get that. I understand that.
Appreciate that.
And I'm just saying that they're not sitting on top of, I mean, it's just when you think about it, when it's presented to you and your thought process is X, it's really not. It's just, it is what the property is. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, if not in the, like Brian, we're not arguing with you. I think the reality here is it's sort of an iterative process, and there are no guarantees along the way, right? And that's, I think, really where you start. I mean, Dakota came, the land is developable. It makes good sense. And then the hope is, you know, and we've conversed with you on this topic, and we've conversed with Malcolm and with Jim, and and with John's office, is how do you get all that cross-pollination occurring? And you know, you got to start with at one point, and that's the point that we're starting at. I don't think scraping the building and going up is, you know, is really sort of a realistic first start.
And that's what I said, you're not gonna do that, just get started. It is, you have to play with what you got. And I understand that, and I'm just saying, you need a zoning change based on the concept of we could do this.
Yeah, no,
That's
doubt.
all I ask.
Look, I mean, I think we identified a problem. We wrote a letter to you and basically said, look, we have a problem. We know we have a problem. And for 3 years, we've been trying to lease up, right? And we've run into really not a great situation. So we came to you and we didn't say, hey, government, fix it. We said, hey, here's some ideas on how we think we could fix it based on the phone calls we're getting, based on the relationships we have in the marketplace, based on the fact that we own another center that we did turn around in town previously with Spins Bowl, right, out there, and said, here are some thoughts, here are some ideas. You all have lived here for decades. Let's collaborate, and this is kind of where we landed. You know, look, you know, in situations like this, I get it, but it's sort of, we all come back to Voltaire's Candide, right, with Dr. Pangloss, right? It's really hard to get the best of all possible solutions. You know, and the land is the land, so that impedes the solution that we can do. The BJ's already sits in the back of the property. We're not displacing them, you know, so that's a factor as to how do you go there. There's the access point that already exists with signalization, which is another. So when you start playing with all that, and Malcolm really pushed us on how do you create that, and that's when Benish came up with the idea of the circle, right, the roundabout in the middle. So we're trying to iteratively make it better and better and better. But I think, yes, the Dakota project is more skill. It's not right in the core, and you know, so maybe the parlance of a hamlet and a hamlet is not the best shorthand, but what we were trying to say is we were trying to make it densify, to create that synergy, to create that pedestrian movement, to change the road pattern so it can happen. But we are, yeah, I mean, we're not gonna tell you that it isn't what you're saying as far as that. And then as far as, you know, that Dakota works in this need with workforce housing. I mean, that is their primary, you know, forte. And I think the other challenges, candidly, is the rent roll around here for a luxury market is really very unproven. And that would be an incredibly speculative and high-risk project by comparison.
If I may, just to answer Al's question about the variance. So, this was kind of the issue that we had with Old Hopewell Commons. Because I believe they have variance to go from 2.5 to 3 stories. So, the difference between 2.5 and 3 stories, in some respects, is a distinction without a difference. 2.5 stories just means that the top story has to have a slanted roof. So it's a 3-story building, but the top story has a pitched roof. A 3-story building can have a flat roof. So that's the distinction between 2.5 and 3. To get a variance, the problem is that a developer would have to, in essence, design the plans, come up with a whole concept, and then come in, you know, to get the variance. It would be difficult to get funding because there's no guarantee that you're going to get the variance ahead of time. So if you're going to spend a lot of money on a project, it makes more sense to try to go to the town board and amend the code to get what you want, rather than potentially, you know, have to get through the variance process. So that, I think, is basically.
So how did the other apartment complex, well, how were they able to accomplish that then? Because they got the variance.
What's that?
I said, how was the other apartment complex able to accomplish getting the variance then from the 2.5 to three stories high?
Because
Did they have the
Again,
same
there's no
issue with the
difference.
financing that Mr. Alexander has?
you know the criteria, right? Undesirable change in the neighborhood, everything else. I mean, the difference, frankly, is the difference between a 2-story building and a 2.5-story building and a 3-story building is just the slope of the roof. So from a variance point of view, doesn't really make a whole lot of, I mean, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to call out half stories because the height is really the bigger issue rather than what the type,
Then why don't we change the code then, if that's the issue? Should have changed the code.
Yeah.
and that's what they're asking.
Right. We've had this discussion in the past relative to height restrictions. My position has consistently been that the restrictions should be lifted. If you look at the existing construction that's behind Wappinger Plaza, you're going to see 3- and 4-story buildings in the village. You're also going to see that behind the Home Depot Plaza. You're also going to see at Old Hopewell Commons, which does, it sits in a bowl too, Old Hopewell Commons, so that was part of the discussion. It was a little bit different.
That was,
Yeah, that was the discussion. So, but if you look at the preserve, nature preserve, you'll see 3- and 4-story, 3 stories above a garage. So it's really semantics, and you're right, it should be changed within the code, and that's what we're trying to achieve right now. I want to see less buildings with higher height. I don't want to see more buildings with lower height, you know what I'm saying? And in this particular model, the way that it's laid out, based on what they said before with 24 and 36 units in each building, I think you need to have these heights that Malcolm has indicated here to achieve that. Correct, Malcolm?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that from an urban planning perspective, what we're trying to accomplish here, and also from an environmental perspective, in terms of sprawl and conservation, I think it makes a lot more sense to build up than out, within reason, right? Without unduly impacting visually the neighbors. And if we can do that here, if we can increase building heights and get that development, I think that would be the smart choice.
I was also going to add that I think it's important to also understand the way the code is proposed to be for rewriting. If you think about it from Diamond and Dakota's perspective and from your perspective, this is the first of 3 processes we're going to be going through, 2 of which we're going to do with you. And I think that's really important because I think that what I'm hearing is there's some concerns about control and leverage and getting what you want and having assurances. This legislation, if it were passed, is set up such that we essentially have to come forward to you with a special permit application, which will also be a site plan approval process with the planning board. And what's also really important is from a seeker standpoint, that will start a whole new seeker process. And what I would foresee in that situation is you as the town board, since you're allocating the uses and the density and intensity on the site, which will then be parsed out through the site plan process, you will more than likely be the lead agency on that site plan special permit process. So this is not like you're giving us, this isn't sort of Arizona or California where you're giving us approval to go build a 1,200 single-family master plan community with a series of cul-de-sacs and roads and sewage treatment plants and things like that, and all in one shot, right? This is the first of 3 processes, right? If the legislation goes through and you approve it, we come back with an application for site plan special permit, coordinated seeker review, because planning board needs to give a site plan approval, you need to give a special permit approval as to how the intensity of the uses. We work through a lot of these issues again in that context with more specificity, but it gives us the sense that we can go out and market to people and say, here's what the legislation says, here's what we're now allowed to do as to use. There are a lot of people who aren't going to, look, frankly, there are a lot of developers who wouldn't come forward and do this kind of a high-risk endeavor to try and get the legislation forward. They would just manage the asset and, manage it downward, and they wouldn't come forward with vision. That's what Diamond does. They have this vision and they unlock it, and you've been to their website. all the things they've unlocked. Heck, they unlocked your own bowling alley for you in your own town, right? You brought that back. Brought that whole plaza back in a really nice way. They took a 600,000 square foot building that was missing most of its roof, that was partially underwater, that was owned by Carl Icahn. Not that he's a man who's lacking in vision, okay? And they brought that back to 100% occupancy for a period of time. And then they ran into some challenges there, and they went to that municipality and said, hey, we need some help and some loosening here because we're getting this discontinuity between where we're getting phone calls for and what the code does. And that community redid the legislation, and we were able to bring forward great tenants there. So they are capable of delivering on what they're talking about, but you're also not giving us carte blanche. We have a whole nother process ahead of ourselves if you were to just adopt the legislation. And so sort of back to the other thing is if legislation isn't achieved, then the whole thing sort of stops. If legislation is achieved, you haven't approved a sure result for us or for you. There's much, much more time for input. And if that community college came forward, that would be great. Hopefully it wouldn't be Olivet, right? In any event.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said hopefully it wouldn't be Olivet, who was the front page of the news today, right? So the point being that, there's still time for that tenant. And if you all know tenants that you think would be better and we haven't said no to anybody other than people we thought that you wouldn't like two pool halls. So, it's a continuing dialogue, but we really need legislation in order to be able to even keep Dakota interested and other people, to get them to come forward, candidly.
Okay, any comments from the audience? Yes.
Good evening. My name is Grace Martin. Live at 52 Fieldstone Loop, and I've been a resident in that house for, sorry to say, 38 years already. Time flies. I've been watching this for a year as well as the other presentations that the board has seen, so I appreciate this opportunity. I think one of the fears that I'm hearing is that in this particular, by the way, I like the vision of the project. I clearly do. This is the first time at least someone has spoken up because of the questions of the board and has admitted that you actually can get real businesses in there right now. That's the first time I've heard that. So that was nice to hear that honesty. I like the vision, where I believe if we can do it under the present code, that would be good. My fear of the project is that at one point in time, if you change the code, I think we'll lose control. And I'll give you a couple examples, and again, this has been very complicated. I like the idea of having green space. I like the idea of having buildings in the area. I like the idea of filling the buildings that are there. In the past, we've turned down BJ's because we didn't want a gas station. I agree, we don't need any more gas stations, and we don't need any more storage units, okay? As far as vision from the street, if you drive up the road a little bit, you have the Galleria and the South Hills Mall. No visibility from the road. You've talked in the past about signage. I think we have to look at signage improvements so people know what's in these plazas. Okay, but like I said, and as far as walking, nobody walks. Sorry, don't. And I'm a runner and a walker. Nobody walks. I like the idea of the apartments, but what I seen of the plan, you have 6 or 7 different phases. What you do last is potentially veterans housing. What you do, and I'd like you to consider in the housing that you're doing, that you're talking about, the 48 units, the 60 units, the 36 units, how many of them are you going to put aside for a senior population? If you listen to what's been shown to the board, there is demographics that we're an aging population. Again, I like the vision. My fear is we will lose control. What Malcolm has shown, he's basically talked about what can go in those businesses. Doesn't look like it's limited to too many things, except some small manufacturing and some other things. I mean, If you look at what has happened in this community in the 40-plus years I've lived here, I'll say one thing, change is constant. We watched the Mays Mall go downhill because the South Hills Mall was made. We watched the South Hills Mall go down because the Galleria was made. So the vision of South Hills Mall a handful of years ago, and it took 20 years to develop, was knock it down, start all over again. Fishkill's doing that with the Mays Mall. Again, I like the vision of having housing because I believe we need housing. My fear is we'll lose control. Small shops, all the small shops here, there's enough of them that get filled. Look at, I guess it's where, I'll call it the Lawrence Farms Plaza. Small businesses in there. Clothing, restaurants. Yeah, there's a little bit of turnover, but I don't think there's an empty store. So I like the vision of repurposing one of the biggest pieces of property. But I think we've been told some fallacies. The street signage, if that's improved, you'll get people up there. We have people who can fill the buildings now, okay? And if we don't, knock it down, start all over. I don't like the vision, though, of you have to build the apartments first. If you have people that are willing to take these buildings, even if it's short-term, get them in there, okay? Again, people do not walk. All those places you named, Bill, they're wonderful, but people still don't walk to them. I know people who live in River Bend, and I would walk to Hannaford's. They don't walk to Hannaford's. And by the way, I would not walk to Hannaford's if I'm lugging home 3 large containers of water. Water's heavy. I know, I'm watering the senior garden here. Again, I like the vision. If it can be done by variances, again, I understand 2 stories versus 3 stories. 2 stories are fine, because then you'll accommodate maybe some more seniors, maybe some more vets, maybe our ADA people who need to decide on the handicap. Those are all buzzwords for 3 years I've heard used in front of this board, okay? And you do all support those organizations. So thank you for that. It's time, my fear is we'll lose control. My main objection to this particular project, and as I'm looking at my notes, I love the green space. My main objection is if anybody even thinks they're gonna put an entrance onto Old Hopewell Road by that access road, they are not really doing good thinking. Use your 3 entrances in, force it that way. There should never be an emergency exit coming out behind that Gulf station. There will be many accidents. Old Hopewell Road is still, I call it the Caterpillar, and if anybody comes over that last hill, I'm always afraid to be the person that's last, because someone comes over that last hill, doesn't see my car, and they'll be rear-ended. So that, if there's any way that you can control that, that would be a big help. So again, I thank you for your attention, and I thank all the presentations I heard, but I still say, if we can do it by the present code, with maybe some changes for a variance or whatever that right way it is, if we can't lose control. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Grogan, do you have any response to that? No, let the principal speak.
I'd like to thank you. I think that's great, and I agree. In terms of losing control, I'm sorry. Let me just sort of get my thoughts. The Hopewell, we don't have any intention, unless it's required to do so, is to make a connection onto Hopewell, and of course we will do that. But that is not something that we're pursuing. In terms of smaller tenant mix, yeah, we're open to anything. I mean, we're in commercial real estate. We buy investment properties. You know, BJ's a good tenant. We bought the property, you know, for that and the other tenants. We're not picky. We're not choosy, and we also aren't fancy. You know, Jim Diamond, our CEO, is very focused on cost. He is very focused on doing the right thing. And I wish I could turn around. It's kind of annoying, but we'll do whatever it takes. You know, we've been working really hard. We're not opposed to exploring every and all avenue, and that's really why, you know, I'm here tonight.
Thank you.
And the only thing I was actually going to say to add is if you check the new Town of Poughkeepsie comprehensive plan that was adopted in October of 2021, they talk about a new South Hills Mall, and what are the uses they want to see going into that? Multifamily. And they're talking about writing legislation specifically into the zoning code to encourage a project like this, actually, for the South Hills Mall area.
Can I rebut that? The South Hills Mall. South Hills Mall has been rebuilt. They're still blessed to have several anchor stores and small-time stores. Yes, their vision has not been able to fill it because if anything is constant, it's change. And, but if they are thinking of putting housing up, they would do it in the front empty parking lots. But if again, I don't know off the top of my head, the percentage of stores that are filled, but they've also there was at least 3 or 4 or 5 good anchor stores in there now, as well as smaller stuff. Yes, they haven't filled it, so that's the first I'm hearing that Poughkeepsie is considering putting housing, but I don't think they'll revision what they did with brick and mortar.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Any other comments? Sure. Madam Supervisor, come on up.
All of my 2 readers, although we're hoping to increase my reading to 4 readers pretty soon. Barbara Gutzler, 5 Russet Lane. The question that I have for the gentleman is, in the original presentation where you said 3-story walk-ups, all right, now, to me, a walk-up, having been raised in New York City, is you walk, no elevators. What's the provision for people with disabilities? Okay, because I fit into 2 categories. A, I'm a senior citizen on a fixed income, and B, I also have a couple of artificial joints here, and it's very hard for me to walk upstairs. So I'd like to know what the provision is for people with disabilities. So if you could elaborate on that, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to hand this over to Dakota Partners. We're not, Diamond Properties is the owner, and I do want to clarify, because there has been some confusion in the past, is that we own the site and we would be selling the plus or minus 10 acres to Dakota to build. So we're not involved in the residential development.
So it is a walk-up, just like you envision in New York City, so you do have to use stairs. No, there's not intended to be elevators. So we'll have at least 5% of units on the first floor will be fully accessible, and all the first floor units will also be visitable, meaning that if somebody came, that, you know, a visitor came that was handicapped, they'd be able to get around all the first floor units. That's.
Would it specifically be set aside, or it's just, if it's available, you're in luck, if it's not available, you're SOL?
They're set aside for a certain period of time. It's a pretty long period of time. We historically have had good luck filling them with people that actually need the amenities.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, seeing none, I have a motion to adjourn.
Clarify that, adjourn the public hearing?
Postpone it, yeah.
Jim, what's our?
Whatever the proper language is, because we're going to have to consider text amendment next
Right.
time.
Right.
And
So we're going to adjourn the
Public hearing.
public hearing.
Public
Okay,
hearing.
so I'll make a motion that we adjourn the public hearing.
I'll second it.
To the next meeting date?
The 18th.
18.
The next regular meeting
July
of the town
18th.
board, July 18th. Oh, thanks for clarifying that, because I probably would have showed up on Monday.
Okay, a motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passes. Thank you. Okay, the only other agenda item that we have tonight is to discuss.
I was.
Al. Okay, we have before us the memorandum of agreement, the MOA, from the Teamsters Union pursuant to what we had, previously discussed.
Sure.
And the Teamsters have approved that, I think unanimously.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to pass the resolution.
Second.
Second.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passes. Thank you. Any other new business?
I just want to thank you for coming this evening and giving us input, all of you. So thank you, because I know this was a special meeting.
And Neil, no
But thank
offense, it means a lot to have the principals here.
Yep.
Neil, we love you, but hearing directly from the principals makes me feel a little more comfortable. No offense, Neil.
Actually, that's better than I thought it was going to be. It's more charming.
But I understand it was
Honestly,
short,
thank you.
it was short notice, and we appreciate you being able to do this
Do you have
tonight.
an email by any chance, or a card? I do. Could you give it to me, please? Do you have one, sir? I don't have a card. I'm sorry?
Seeing no other
I can't
business
hear
while we're
anything.
talking offline, I have a motion.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, I'll take one.
Second.
Motion and second
What-
to adjourn. All in favor?
Second.
Aye.
I'm sorry?
Thank you. All in favor? Thank you.
I can't, yeah, why don't you do it?
Thank you so much.